to do it.
That.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for inviting me. I know everyone is so zoomed out, and but usually if you tell people you're going to help them raise more money, at least a few people will show up because we all want to do that. So thanks for the invitation. Let me just go and switch. I put a slide together for a couple reasons. One, some of us are visual learners, so I thought that was good. And two, I wanted to give you something in case there are other people in your organization that you might want to share this with. We can send this around after, and I don't want you to feel like you have to take any notes. But really, I want to invite you to jump in with your questions, comments. You know, this is really supposed to be a discussion, but I do have a few things on this. Look, I've been a fundraiser for 20 years, and I've lived through recessions and whatnot, but we've never had a pandemic. I've never lived through a pandemic, so we're all kind of learning together as we go. I will say, a couple of things just, in our short time together. I want to touch on your fundraising strategy and hopefully your reassessment, how you can balance the appropriateness of fundraising now with the tension between being tone deaf and needing to be bold, and what action items would I recommend that you're doing this quarter, next quarter, and the following, and then take your questions. So I'm always ambitious because I'm a friend of Aaron's, and I believe in talking fast and getting a lot done, but if I'm too fast, you'll slow me down. Okay, so I want to start with reassessing your fundraising strategy, because I think what happened in the first 4 to 8 weeks of this pandemic is that people, kind of what you all described at the beginning of this call, like we're reactive. And so now that we can kind of, collect ourselves, it really, if you haven't done it already, putting pen to paper on the fundraising strategy, I think is very important. Looking at your major and board donors line by line, thinking about your events, whether they be rescheduled or virtual, government funding, foundations, your corporate partners, and whatever you do for annual, and if you do anything on individual donors or otherwise for monthly or subscription, what are the impact on each of these, and where are the projections on each of these based on what you know, and then how can we get creative? So, if you haven't formally updated your fundraising strategy, now is a good time to do it, that we have an inclination about the beginning of opening. So I would just start from there. I will say that for foundations, 745 foundations have signed a pledge from the Council of Foundations to loosen or eliminate the restrictions on grants. And why this is good news potentially for you is that if you received grants for specified programs that are not running, it is quite possible that you may be able to keep that grant money or reallocate it. So Alec, have you had experience with that? Oh, good. Okay. So what I would say is check in with anyone that you received grants from, review and confirm commitments, and don't be afraid to discuss ability to loosen or eliminate restrictions. They're also really loosening reporting requirements, which is also good news. So that, if you haven't checked in on all of your grants, please, please, please do that. And don't be shy. Discuss opportunities for special funding in light of COVID. But we're really seeing the foundation world step up. I do think it's going to be hard to get new money, but I think if you have existing relationships, it's certainly time to, really be in conversation. On your corporate donors, it obviously depends on how the business is impacted. I have to say that I hosted a webinar with a colleague of mine who's in corporate social responsibility, and it's really all over the place. I mean, on some hand, we're seeing a lot of corporations that we know do really well and feel this, desire to be more engaged in the community because they know how tough this is. And in other cases, obviously, some businesses are just, flat out. So again, we want you to check in with the people who have been your partners or sponsors and confirm commitments and discuss new opportunities, but also be aware that for local businesses that support you, that it may be tough. And so national businesses are more likely to be able to be partners. And that's really where working your board's connections, as always, is so important. If you don't get Joe Waters' selfish giving, do you get it, Marlene? you get his newsletter? If you don't get Joe Waters' Selfish Giving newsletter, I encourage you to sign up for it. He's kind of the Mac Daddy of the cause marketing world, and he's quite excellent with very practical tips in this space right now. So I recommend that you sign up for that. But what he basically said is, you know, let's face it, there's going to be less money and less places have deep pockets, you know, but like then you have places like McDonald's that plans to spend $100 million on marketing this year. So there is money, but it's always about connections, as we know. But check in with the people who have supported you in the past, similar to the foundation. I want to say something about individual giving. I know for some of your programs, this may be a smaller piece. I do think that it always starts with your boards and their networks, and people really want to help. What I'm seeing in my practice, and I work with, you know, all different size organizations across the country, is that it is true that people are stepping up. Giving brings meaning and fulfillment to people, and it's something that our brains are hardwired for. And during this time when people can't control anything, people want agency. So I keep saying to people, and I'm going to say it now, don't decide for your donors. If people are individual donors who have supported you in the past, don't decide for them. If they don't want to give to you, they won't give to you, but you should be asking. And people are raising money. Some people are raising a lot of money. And I think that historically we know, I didn't pack this with data because I didn't think we had time, but if we go back and look at the recession years and we go back and look at depression years even, individual giving in particular, it dips, absolutely, but it doesn't drop off. So I have said, you know, many times the future favors the bold, and I'll say that again and again. I think it's time to be bold on the individual giving. I want to just talk about your message for a second. Just by like show of hands, have you all refined kind of your message and your case for giving? Alec has done it, kind of done it. Okay, you done it? Okay, so here's the thing I'll just say, and I'm not going to read through all this, I'm going to send this to you after. Here's the tip I can give you. You refined your message to talk about how you pivoted. You're going to have to keep refining your message because you're going to have a different reopening message, and then you're going to have a different innovation message, and then you're going to have a different what's the impact on our program and our kids 6 months out, 9 months out. So I think this is one of the trickiest parts, is that, you know, we kind of got the initial how we pivoted message down, but we have to keep refining it. So my best advice is to make sure that your marketing, your development, and your best kind of, you know, aggregators of all the different threads are sitting together to kind of make this nice and crisp, especially around how the money you're raising and needing to raise is going to directly help the people that you serve. That has never been more important. And how does COVID make that need even greater? And why you? So, you know, these prompts are here to be helpful, but I think I'm seeing people that did good messaging to show how you pivoted, but what I'm seeing is that 12 weeks in, we need to refresh it, and it has to evolve. So week 1 and 2, then week 3, 4 to 12, how you're evolving, and then how do you resume your business, and what's the impact of COVID on your organization, with it at a deeper level, right? Like, what does it mean for your kids? What does it mean for your families? What does it mean for them, and for you? So I think, you know, that is really key. And if you're talking to your foundation and your corporate partners and even your individual donors, as you refresh your message with, of course, your stories and your anecdotes and your data, that's a reason to be back in touch. So it's a good excuse to retouch base with people. Don't assume, because we're all, I can't remember my name. Someone couldn't remember the day. So don't assume, well, I don't want to bother them. They don't even remember that you called them, to be quite honest with you. People can't keep track of things right now. So one thing that is really appropriate right now, and I've been getting this question a lot, is like, well, what should we really be doing? So I told you should up your, you know, redo your strategy, you reach out to your foundations and corporate, you keep asking, but really you have to be stewarding, because this is a time that we really need good stewardship. Everyone's going to need money, and we need to show that during this time, whether it was our foundation partners, our corporate sponsors, our board members, our individual donors, that we properly stewarded them, because there's no shortage of good causes. And I want to just like be clear, because we haven't talked about this together, we're just meeting. What do I mean by stewarding? So stewarding, of course, is a fundraising term that means basically that they feel better about their gift after they make it than before, in a nutshell. But I think stewarding has lots of components. So I think it's about communicating, updating, giving them opportunities to touch your mission even during this time. So whether it's coming on a remote or watching a video, I think it's about relationship building. How are they? They're not just money bags, they're people or organizations. It's sharing the impact. It's practicing your gratitude and giving lots of social media shout outs. They're free, lots of website shout outs, and lots of recognition. And so to me, this is a perfect time to be doing great stewardship, because we're going to need our donors even more than we needed them before. And it's so much easier to maintain a donor than to get a new donor. And stewardship is the answer to that question. So if you don't have stewardship plans in place for your existing donors, that would be part of your strategy. And, just principles of strong stewardship, honesty and clarity and transparency and all the things that we know to be true, lots of we and us, and all that kind of good stuff that you all know. But I think a written stewardship plan for every single donor, who's doing it, how often are you doing it, there is no substitute. And I'm talking to foundations, I'm talking to corporate social responsibility people, I'm talking to individual donors, and it is true that they're hearing from everyone. So if they're not hearing from you, then it's particularly problematic, right? Because we need to make sure that you're doing as good a job as your peers and the people you're competing for dollars with and the stewardship. Okay. I'm not going to read this through, but there's lots of creative ways. You people are way more creative than I am, so I'm not even going to pretend to tell you how to do your stewardship, but I'll tell you a couple things that I've loved. If there's a movie that talks about the importance of after school, you can do a viewing party, and then you can do a panel discussion. You can do a briefing, like a virtual kind of briefing, as Aaron was describing. I have a development director who loves Peloton, and she figured out which of her donors love Peloton, and they're doing Peloton rides together and then talking afterwards shop. I mean, you can do anything. The rules are, throw away the rule book and do whatever works for your donor base. But I think that you need to get creative, and you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about what is on your stewardship menu that you can offer to the different donors, whether it's your program officer or whether it's your individual board member. Okay. I also want to say something that's been amazing to me. Direct mail and online presence are far from dead. Direct mail is up. Response rates are up. Open rates, I don't know whether you've noticed this, for your newsletters, and open rates for attendance for things are up. We have people's attention. You have a chance to build your list. You have a chance to build relationships, and digitally, remotely. And I think that, it would be silly for us to talk about fundraising if we didn't talk about this opportunity to both build your list, clean your list, investigate your list, organize your list. If you haven't done that good pruning and maintenance that we all say, yeah, we need to look at our database, now's a good time. It's also a chance to build relationships with people that aren't top of mind. Maybe they're lie bunts, so they gave it sometime in the past, but they haven't given recently. Maybe they're consistent donors who haven't given to a maximum. And that could be, by the way, corporate, or it could be individual, or even foundation. But this is a chance for relationship building, but you need to look in your database. Who are you adding? Who's already in there? And how do we take advantage and leverage those assets? And, this is all the kind of good stuff that goes in that plan for how to use this time most fruitfully. So what about asking? So a lot of stuff we've talked about, but what about actually asking for money? Yeah, you need to ask for money. And sustainability is a good reason, even if you're not on the front line. I work with a lot of schools, and a lot of schools called me, a lot of private schools called me and said, how can we ask for money? I'm not a hospital, I'm not a food bank, I'm not a whatever. I said, do you want to be in business when this is over? Well, yeah. Well, then you need to ask for money, right? So sustainability is a good reason, even if you're not on the front line. And And on the individual side, I would say there's a movement for people to have their donor advised funds. So to the extent that you know, for example, in your database of your board members, for example, who gives to you from either donor advised or IRA, but the advantage of the donor advised fund donors, to the extent you have them, is that they've already put that money in that fund and they can never get it back anyway. It has to go for a philanthropic purpose. And so what I'm telling people is, when you look at on your individual side, you need to really pull up these lists, in particular donor advised donors. And those donors should be first on your list. There is a whole movement, you can go on Twitter and find it, about having our donor advised funds. People put away lots of money and there's tax advantages to doing it, and they need to give it away. So that's something to think about. And a lot of organizations are doing special mailings where they're asking people, if you have a donor advised fund, here's our number, our tax ID number, here's how you can give to us. Also, you need to think about if you're going to do emergency fundraising. So many of you might do an emergency campaign depending on what your needs are. And if you're going to do that, how does that look different than what you normally are doing? And how do you name that? And how do you maybe attract some matching donors to make that more enticing to people? Okay. So just a word on virtual events. They were great at the beginning, and they're getting, Alec is nodding yes, and so Brenda is smiling and everyone is agreeing. They're great, and it's interesting to see what people are doing. People are starting to get fatigued. So you need to kind of really think carefully about the virtual events. I love, Aaron, the creative idea that you gave at the beginning. I mean, that's something different. If you could, you know, do something with celebrities, of course, that always works. Direct mail, like I said, is alive. You can build your list, you can buy a list. Ads are cheap, cheap, cheap right now, online ads. And if you don't get, that should say Google ad grants. If you don't get Google ad grants already, does anyone here get Google ad grants? Okay, if you don't get Google ad grants, you might want to look into it because it is a good way to kind of just increase your branding, build your list. Online fundraising, crowd fundraising, and peer-to-peer, again, depending on what your individual giving looks like, people are experimenting with all of these. Okay, so action items, and then I promise to be quiet for your questions. You've got to really engage your development and finance committees to reforecast. You got to go line by line. There's no other way to do this reforecast except for line by line. I really caution people who are telling me, well, we just took 20% off our goal. Well, that means absolutely nothing to me. You need to go name by name, line by line, foundation by foundation, corporation by corporation. Talk about your new strategies. This is really also a time to engage your board in your fundraising and engage all your staff. I keep saying it's all hands on deck for stewardship. We're not asking people for something. Everyone can be involved with your stewardship. Clean up your database. Don't stop fundraising. And then as we get into resumption of your business, we'll have to look at again, keep stewarding, keep fundraising. And then I predict that fourth quarter, if the economy comes back, you'll start to be able to make up some money. Most people don't think that's going to happen until the following fiscal year. Most people aren't anticipating that's going to happen. I think that, I don't want to get political, but people manipulate the markets because of elections to try to boost the economy. So you might see some of that earlier than we might normally see. I don't know. But you know, you might see some of the opportunity there. So that is as fast as I can do it. I hope I saved time. We packed it all in, but unmute yourselves, please, and any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. I'm really here to learn with you.
First of all, let me just say thank you, Nanette. And for those of you who don't know, I've been working with Nanette for years in this capacity, and she's very busy and in demand, and she's doing this as a real favor. So thank you for that. But I would definitely let's open it up to questions for anybody.
I'll go. Thank you, Nanette. This is super helpful, and I think it's aligned with where we're at and thinking so far, especially the pivoting messaging. I feel like our messages have changed. There's no cutting and pasting. There's no looking at last week and saying, let's do the same thing we did last week. It's not happening. I'm curious about the where you started around tone deaf. That's something I've struggled with of, you know, how do you sort of, and not even how do you ask for money, because I think we still are making the case for money, but even things like newsletters, you know, do you make the newsletter all COVID all the time? You know, are people sort of like, oh geez, do you do anything else besides that? But then when you do something else, you know, you put in like the smiley happy kid, does that seem really weird too? Because that's not COVID, right? So things like that, I feel like I'd love to get your take on.
Muted.
Oh, you're muted.
There's a little bit of research that's emerging that shows us that it actually came out of England, but I think it holds true, where what people really want to, they're not sick of hearing about COVID. What they want to know is a hopeful message, though. And what people are responding to is that there's going to be a post-COVID and your organization is going to be ready to do it. And in the interim, you're still doing good things and helping people's lives be better. So I don't think you run from COVID. I think you acknowledge the pain of COVID and the impact of COVID, but I think you have to be hopeful. It can't be, drear and doom. It has to be, remember, people love giving. It makes them feel good. It actually releases a chemical that makes people feel good on the individual side. Corporations give for different reasons. They're good social doobies and they like your eyeballs too. But on individual giving, and I think on messaging, people have to believe that you're grounded in reality, but you offer both solution-based to the current problem and that you're optimistic and bold on the future and your organization's ability to make up, whether it's the gap in academic preparedness, whether it's the, solve the problem for parents that are working, all the things we normally would do, those don't go away because of COVID.
So building on the message piece of things, in New York, for example, there's been tons of funds set up for, needs now, if you will. And as I said to my board, a month into this, if I was choosing between feeding somebody next week or sending them to a professional development workshop, I would feed them first. Right. With that. Talk, if you can, a little bit, because if you've worked with Aaron, then we have similar issues where we don't have direct service. We don't have cute little kids running around right here. And yet, as the sector has needs, that's what we are here to meet, both including, literally what we're sitting here doing right now, but as well as thinking about how we make sense of this, how we learn from this, how we support, how we allow people to do the work that will actually be most effective with children.
Yeah, it's
right here.
It's a super important point. It's not as tangible. It takes a lot of words to explain, right? So that's always the challenge. So what I would say is think of your most concrete example of a way that you've prepared people through a training, through a convening, through materials that you're going to allow, that you've either allowed them to work through this period and without you, that wouldn't have happened, so you've been indispensable, or that you're readying to open the door. So it's almost like there's a Clorox box, there's mask, and there's what you're doing, which is gonna allow this after school to open. Okay, so you've gotta be part of the kit, the survival kit of during COVID and the post-COVID kit, and that you've got to show proximity to being able to put those cute little kids back where they belong.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah. That's really.
And of course, telling a story is the best way to do it. Right? So the teacher that didn't know what to do, the school administrator that called you crying, the parent, I don't know exactly, I don't know your exact business model, but whatever.
All of the above.
Okay. So, so who, the more that you can tell a story that illustrates how you had that primary role that supports that. Look, video, I am even more a believer than I was before COVID, that people are going to stop reading and just watch videos now that everyone spent basically 3 months being told to watch Netflix and look at YouTube. For 3 months, you were commanded by your government to sit down and watch videos. People aren't going to go back to being like, let me read your 10 pages, right? So to the extent that you can get on as the leader and do a Facebook Live, don't be afraid. It doesn't have to be buttoned down. The one thing I love about this time, I love the idea that we're getting over our perfectionism, that we're getting over the idea that we have to have it perfect and buttoned and blah. Get on Facebook Live, tell people the story, cry on the screen if you can about how you helped today. The more authentic and raw you can be, the better. And then catalog those videos, pop them in a newsletter to your board and your donors, and set that baby going viral. Because what I want is, I mean, I don't want you to fake it, but I want emotion. This is a very emotionally charged time, and I think video just captures that so beautifully.
Can I ask a question, Nanette, about kind of open source materials versus products? And Marlene, maybe if I don't shape this the right way, you can help me here. But you know, there are a lot of open source materials that are being made available right now or being underwritten. Previously, when we were talking to our funders, it was a real value add, right? That we had shared commitment from our partners, you know, that we offer services and they share in the cost. And then we do raise money to underwrite and also share in that cost.
Sure.
And so I'm struggling a little bit with how you position yourself in this market when there is a real cost to what you're doing and it's not all underwritten. And do you have to like enter something into this open source space right now to even get noticed, if you will? Is that a fair question, Marlene?
Yeah, I think that's the good way to articulate it.
Yeah, so look, I think that there's always the option of being really transparent and saying, we're offering this up, here's the cost, and almost like a crowdsourcing, a crowdfunding approach to say, like, if you can help defray it, great. And then also, you know, I do think that going to funders and saying, here's what we're doing, right? We don't want to get bogged down in you paid for it, you can, you can't, we need to do this, but here's our actual cost. And I'm going to tell you another phrase. I love fortune, you know, future favors the bold, but my other one is radical transparency. And I think that you have to literally say, this is how much this costs to do it. This is what we estimate the value to the, by having open source, we estimate this to be the value to the, you know, community at large. And obviously there's a lot of leeway in what that value is, right? I mean, you have to be realistic, but value it. And in order to produce that and bring that value, which by the way, does all these things to respond, whatever, here's what bottom line we need to be able to bring that to market. And I think the more you can break it down for people in a way we haven't done in the past, right? We always say, here's our fundraising goal. But for this question, I think you need to kind of actually show what is the cost, because people don't also know it's not just an intern that sat and pasted a bunch of stuff together. There's actual time and expertise that you're paying for, right? You know, just like Aaron said, the camp association had to pay. Someone had to pay to get that report done. So someone had to pay for that, right?
That's super helpful.
Great. Yeah, and let me just say, like, I'm happy to talk offline, like if we're not going to cover all of your specifics, but if you have like very specific to your organization, I'm happy to. I talk to all FOAs, friends of Aaron.
Well, you're kind. And, you know, what I think one point that really resonates to me, by the way, Nanette, was about the sensitivity to our board members. I think so many nonprofits just want to ask, and now we think our needs are more. But like a lot of these, I had, you know, more when I was with After School All-Stars, we had like more big-time national CEOs. But just to give examples from them, Fox Sports, you know, the guy was a rich, huge, powerful guy. During COVID, there's no sports.
Right.
Broke.
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
These guys who it's a real role reversal. Usually, like nonprofits are always asking for help, but you feel like they're all knowing and powerful, and like they're in some cases like more vulnerable and in bad shape than we are, and so you have to kind of like, not being tone deaf, but like, you know, do a little research. You might have to just be a listening ear to them for a minute. Because
absolutely, there's no asking before there's kind of checking in that relationship piece of the stewardship. You know, you can't just go with the hand open. On that point, Aaron, I'll just also say that I think, you know, I'll give an example here in Boston, one of the schools that I work with, we ended up being able to get money of all things from their fruit and produce supplier, because apparently COVID is a wonderful time to be in the fruit produce like distribution, because the need is really high, and they launched all these businesses to do whatever. Anyway, my point is they're so under the radar. Like normally we would have taken their like whatever they gave and been like, oh, okay, you're in the fruit and produce business. Meanwhile, they're the richest ones on the board table right now. So it's like, don't assume either way, right? Don't assume that, you know, Fox Sports still has money, but also don't assume that this other business that figured out a way to pivot successfully,
Yeah.
you know, doesn't have
So
money.
that's a good question, though, Nanette. So just again, just give another example, but the bigger question. Thank you for that. So like JCPenney was one of the biggest funders of after school for many years. They just declared bankruptcy.
Right.
I mean, it is throwing a wrench. You know, if you're in retail, you're in the Marriott. You live in
It's
Washington,
brutal.
the
It's
biggest funder,
brutal. It's
the
brutal.
hotels, the restaurants, right? All this.
Hospitality, yeah, all of that, brutal.
So I guess the question then becomes, though, how do we do what's the best way to do research on who's actually doing well and making money in this time?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I don't know, do you all have like wealth screening and database and like access to your own tools that you use normally to research individual corporations and whatnot?
Google.
Or just Google. Alec, do you have a system?
Yeah.
What do you use?
You know, Wealth Engine and all those.
Yeah. So look, I mean, on some level, you have to it's a combination between what we would typically use, but it's going to be dated because they don't COVID update them. The news, right? Like following the news and talking to them. But more importantly, you know, we also have to remember there's three things that we care about. If they have a commitment, can they pay the commitment they already made? In some ways, I actually care a lot more about that because if I'm not going to get the money that I was pledged, I need to know that ASAP. So that's the first, you know, kind of, are you good for what you promised me that you still haven't paid if you're in a 2-3 year deal? Also, you know, what's the state of your business now, just generally, and what's your prediction for the future? Because there are some businesses that are going to come right back as soon as this. You know, as soon as we can open, they're closed because they're not doing well because, you know, whatever. Sports, by the way, I won't cry for too much because it's going to come back. However, tourism related things, for example, if there's no international travel to 2022, which is what, you know, some people are saying right now on a broad scale, that might be a harder comeback. So I think you have to do a combination of, you know, using the tools you have, looking at, you know, conversation and inquiry and some productive indexing of, you know, directionally where you think we're headed, and an honest conversation about like, this is what I'd like to ask you for. How does that feel? And if they can't do it, they're going to tell you, but don't not ask. I mean, quite honestly, like I the first couple of weeks of this, I was pulling my hair out as people were like sitting there and I was thinking, what are you doing? Like people want to help, like go, go, go. You know, so if anything, you know, steward, ask, and don't be tone deaf if their business is off. Maybe you wait and maybe you see what happens when they come back in fourth quarter and they're feeling better, or maybe at the beginning of next year. The timing is key. But you know, business is going to go on. Life is going to go on. When I look at Indiana University, and if you don't follow, by the way, if you're a dork on this stuff like I am, and you really care about looking at past problems in the world, you know, Indiana University, their philanthropy institute kind of tracks, you know, how giving was at all these different times in history. And you know, the irony is that the initial read is that corporations are much more sensitive than individual mid-tier donors, right? Kind of makes sense. And that large donors are more sensitive because they're more tied to the stock market than mid-tier kind of donors. So there's all this interesting learning that you can kind of see. And so part of that also informs, like, if we're going to be in this for the next 2 to 3 years, directionally, where do you need to build out your donor plan, right?
But also, just on that, even just looking at my board and some others, making it to a point you brought up earlier, let somebody else decide whether or not they want to give. Don't make that choice for them, because this, you know, people's wealth is in not obvious places sometimes. And so, yeah, their industry may currently be having a really horrible time. Does not mean they didn't bank a whole lot prior to this, or that just things happen in people's lives where they've come into something. And I found the times that I've sometimes made an assumption, you know, where you think the disaster is hitting everybody dramatically, well, needless to say, as we're seeing in the current disaster, it can hit, people are experiencing this very differently. I mean, just regionally makes such a difference.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That was really interesting to me. My board, depending on where they were sheltering in space, they had very different reactions to things.
Absolutely. It's
Can
so
I ask
true.
a question, Nanette, about the kind of events? I don't know, I think some of us, all the galas had to be canceled. I had a gala that was in process where we had commitments, some money had come in, some were pledged, we never got it. And we still have, so now we canceled it. We hope to do the gala, let's say next spring, if possible. I don't know. Do we try and go to the people that said that they were going to buy tables and try and collect from them? Or do we just say, hey, will you support us next year? And can we count on you for next year?
I would definitely go to the people who you already had a commitment from and say, listen, obviously, we couldn't have the gala. We decided we didn't want to do it virtually. We still need your support. Here's why. We'd love to be able to count on you. First, I'd say, how are you doing? And check in, of course. But I would absolutely go and ask anyone. Even for places that canceled their gala, I encourage them to assume that they could keep the money that was already raised and ask if people wanted it back as opposed to give it back and then ask them to give it. I would absolutely go and ask people if they already committed and indicated that they would be interested in supporting you. Because look, at the end of the day, you need the money. And I really want to just say this is that, like, I think that every day that we're not asking for money, we're actually, doing ourselves a huge disservice to our mission. And my whole thing is that asking for money on a good day is a mental game. It is a mental game to be able to get up and make phone calls and ask people, but you're not asking for you, you're asking for the mission. And so that's why that messaging is so important, to be so tight, because your kids are suffering. The people you serve need the money. So I think we always have to kind of, whether you're removed one step from that service or not, whether you're training and convening and educating the people that do the service, we've got to keep an eye on the mission. And if you let the mission do it, when you're calling for the dinner, you're not asking for, it's not about the dinner. It's like, we're not having the dinner, but I still need to get all this work done for the mission that you really cared about. So will you join us in investing? Because these kids are going to need us, now more than ever.
Thank you. Yeah.
Alec, did you have?
Yeah, first of all, this is so great. So thank you.
Sure,
both validating and informative. And, I whenever that webinar was, Aaron and Leslie, we talked a little bit about our shift in messaging. And, the first week or two, it was, we're heartbroken, and we quickly, everybody's favorite word is pivot these days, right? And so, I think our collective voice around the only thing that has changed is delivery. Our mission has not changed. Our goals, our values, goals have maybe shifted, but delivery has changed, but nothing else has changed. And just reframing all the messaging into asset. And Aaron and NSLA has been great about, summer's going to matter more than ever, and rethinking and redefining and stretching. And then I also like what you said. You saw me nodding my head. This was a half an hour ago. We just assume there's flexibility with our donors. We almost say, thank you for being flexible about how we allocate our dollars this summer. As opposed to, do we have permission to, allocate it to whatever, general operating or learning packets? We just say, thank you for your flexibility, and we'll keep it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the only caveat I would just say is that if you got a foundation grant,
sure, yes,
with the individual donors, of course. With the foundations, it's better to ask permission on that end. And for corporate partners, I would just say you can assume too, but get their okay stamp, because those relationships, at some point someone's going to keep track.
Good advice.
Yeah. I'll just say one thing in general about all of this. We've talked about boards a little bit, and Aaron knows, like, my other area when I'm not talking about money is talking about board. So I just want to say this about your board. You've got to activate your board. you cannot do this work alone. You shouldn't do this work alone. And if people on boards aren't going to get activated now on behalf of your mission, by the way, I never said ask for money. They can be stewards. I don't care if they ask for money. But this board activation piece is so like key in your ability to do this. You're all really busy. I just am honored that you even have an hour to spend on this call. And you're not going to get to steward the people that need to get stewarded by your organization with just your paid staff. There's no way. So if you can't activate your board, you will leave money on the table. That's just the fact. So that's a challenge, I know, for everyone to activate their board. But, you know, I have been zooming into all these board meetings, kind of like reading the boards, the riot act, to be like, it's either now or never. You either care about the mission or you don't. You're either fiduciaries on the balance sheet side, you know, you're either on the revenue side and on the expenditure side, or you're not. And that's the advantage to being a consultant, because I get to say it and run away. I don't have to actually stay and work with anybody. But you know, I think it's really that board activation piece. It's a lot of work, but don't run from that, because they can help you do the stewardship. They can help you clean up the database. They can help you get new names by forwarding your emails. They can be ambassadors while you're doing stuff online. Yeah. You don't have to get money. It can be a lot of other things.
Nanette, just to add, and so I want to just make a few things, because we're at 3 o'clock and I know people have to run. I have to run, everybody, but I think this has been so helpful. But Nanette is a real expert on board leadership and board management. Written a couple books on it, and also just wrote a book, a more recent book, is about being a board chair, which I think we all know doesn't come with a lot of training. Sometimes people end up in that role. It's a significant role, and they don't have a lot of previous experience. So that's a real expertise. Maybe there's a time for us to bring you back, Nanette, or you could talk offline and have your own conversations. And
or go directly to our board chairs. Sorry.
Yeah, you know, and that I'm just saying about the boards. We're saying don't assume who has money, who doesn't. Also, don't assume who's busy and who's not. There are a lot of people. Yeah. I got the chief marketing officer of Clear Channel, a historically busy guy. No one's on the roads. No one's looking at billboards. He's got time. Maybe he doesn't have money, but he could do a marketing campaign right now with his whole staff that he's trying not to lay off. So your point of like, what can they contribute? And not everyone's as busy as we are. We're all super busy at the moment, but there are people hanging around that are looking for projects pro bono or whatnot. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, thanks so much. I mean, you know, we can talk. I'm happy to come back and talk about boards with your board chairs or not. And, you know, I'll send that deck to Aaron to send out, but feel free to use it with permission. And if it's helpful and if I can be a resource, let me know. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is awesome. And it's also just motivating. I feel like I need to get on the phone. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Nanette.
All right, good. Thanks, guys. Take good care.
See you soon.
Thank you. Aaron, thank you.
Thank you. Of course. Whatever we can do to be helpful.
That was amazing. That was
all right.
So needed. Thank you.
Good. All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Good to see you, Alec.